Hey guys, it is November 28th, 2 weeks after the Orphea release, which means we get our balance patch. 2 weeks after a hero or a rework, it's natural that there's going to be a balance patch, not only to fix that hero, but also take a look at the meta. In between HGC, whenever there's no pro things going on for about a month or two, we usually see more changes, as it's more likely that we can just really shake up the meta and then have people catch up to it before another pro season. So this patch, as well as in the next couple patches, we're likely going to see the most changes. So right off the bat, we see Chen right up there, and I know a lot of people are getting excited. Don't. Onto the first change that they're making is one of my favorite changes of this patch and gets me actually excited to just go right into quick match, which I normally don't like quick match. But quick match is now getting that prioritization where they're going to try to get a warrior, a support, and range assassin into every game. Part of the issue that I had with quick match was that it taught a lot of bad habits purely because the team comps were always terrible. Say you were playing Nova and you would win like 80% of your games, but you were playing quick match. The problem is that you might have never played it with a tank. You might be playing most of your games where it's just 5 assassins, and that's where Nova thrives, is where no one's ready to really get into a fight, and you can just kind of pick apart someone who got a little bit of poke damage. While a tank and a healer would kind of make it a lot harder to get that value out of Nova. So they are fixing this, making it to where every group is going to have a warrior, support, and an assassin, unless you have a group of 5 people. So if your 5 friends want to just be like, let's run 5 supports because that's going to be funny, you can still do that. However, for every other group, you need to have those. If you have a party of 3, that means that there's one role that you have to do, and then the other 2 roles will be picked up by other people. Parties of 4, you have to fit at least 2 of those roles, and the last person will fit the last one. So if you have a group of 4 people, but no one likes to tank, one person needs to be a ranged assassin, one person needs to be a support. However, this is going to make queue times a little bit longer because everyone wants to play assassins. So the people who are playing tanks and supports will sometimes get bonus experience if those roles are needed. Say there's all these assassin players that are trying to play a new assassin hero that hits the Nexus. All the support and tank players will get 50% bonus experience for being team players. So essentially, if you ever see the Call of the Nexus bonus experience indicator located above each hero when viewing in the hero selection screen, then that means that you're going to get 50% more experience while playing those. I'm really excited because as someone who plays a lot of supports, I'm going to be checking this here and there to see if there's ever a day where there's not a lot of supports being played, because the same thing happened in World of Warcraft, where a lot of times healers were needed for dungeon queues, and they would give you like extra gold or maybe an extra piece of armor or something, and I always loved that. I just did those dungeons all day long whenever I got that bonus. I'll probably be doing the same thing all day long whenever I get that experience bonus. This is actually going to be my time for trying to get a hero to like level 100. Right now, all my heroes are around the same level, so if every time I see this bonus, I'm going to pick like one healer and one tank and play nothing but that and just see how high level I can get them. I think that'll be really fun. Anyways, let's get right onto it. So there are a lot of heroes that are being changed, but no Chen. So sorry for the Chen fans out there. I'm going to go through some of these really quick, and my main reason that I'm going through them really quick is because this patch has a pretty common theme. Nerf the most common build and buff some of the other builds. Or at least nerf the base of the character, but then buff the talents of unusual builds. Not unusual, but just builds that aren't being used as often. As well as some of the common things of nerfing some of the characters that have been a little dominant in the meta, like the Deckard and the Tyrande, which I actually really like to change Tyrande because it's not a hard nerf. It just makes her a little bit less dominant in the early game, which is pretty cool. So let's get right into this. And I'm going to try to speed through some things because there's some heroes that I want to talk about a little bit more, and then there's some that are a little bit I'm indifferent to. So Alarak, he's seeing a few changes, or Alarak if you're one of those people. And so they're not they're not nerfing his Q build, and they're not nerfing his E build, the one that we saw Rich play in HGC. Instead, what they're doing is they're buffing a very specific style, which is all about comboing your own abilities rather than any poke or anything like that. And it's the Ruthless Momentum build. This was one of the builds that I liked because you have to use all three of your abilities in one person. So the goal here is to lower the cooldowns of all of your abilities, and then to deal damage when you hit them with all three abilities, and then lower the cooldowns of your abilities further by auto-attacking the person that you just did your full combo on. I always thought this build was really cool, but it was just kind of underwhelming compared to some of the other builds, and they are not nerfing his other builds, they're just doing that. Genji, he's seeing an auto-attack range decrease. I think this is pretty rough for him because one of the things that Genji... If you're ever playing Genji and your team isn't doing a lot of damage, you're never going to get people low enough to get your resets. You're never going to get people low enough to be a real dominant force. So them lowering the attack range makes it harder for you to get people down on your own, making him more of a team-reliant hero rather than just a powerhouse on his own. These changes are going to hurt people in anywhere from high plat to Masters more than it's going to affect anyone else. Genji had a pretty low win rate. If I remember correctly, from Plat and lower, he had a 47 to 44% win rate, while in Mid-Masters, he had about a 50% win rate, and High Masters and Grandmasters, he had like a 53 to 55% win rate. So in Grandmasters, this probably won't affect him too much, purely because everyone's actively doing stuff, so it's okay to be a little bit more aggressive with your range and everything. However, in Masters as well as Diamond and possibly High Plat, this is going to be a significant nerf. Their goal was to make this nerf him at the highest levels of play, and while this will nerf him at high levels of play, I have a feeling that his highest level of play is still going to be very, very dominant. The thing that's interesting about this is it looks like what they're saying is if this doesn't work, they're going to give Genji a rework. They're like, we like the playstyle of Genji because it's kind of true to his Overwatch nature, but they're worried that if this doesn't actually fix him here, they're going to just rework him. That's kind of what it sounds like to me anyways. So I don't know. I personally don't really like this because it's going to make him more team reliant, where he's going to need to be closer to a healer, he's going to need to be closer to his tank, as opposed to kind of aggressively melting down tanks and then jumping through at backliners if they ever get low. Or if someone's out of position, you just get right on them. But I think a lot of his playstyle is still going to be pretty much the same, but this is a pretty big hit to him. Hanzo. Hanzo is seeing a nerf to his W build, but it's also sort of a buff. If you used his W build for the damage of it in team fights, you were getting nothing but buffs this fight, or this game. But if you used your W build as kind of a macro tool to speed up bosses, camps, and racing on Battlefield of Eternity on the Immortal, then this is going to be a pretty big nerf to you. And I actually agree with all of these changes. Hanzo turned into one of those heroes that he was so powerful when he was doing camps that he kind of just dominated on those maps and became just this powerhouse. We saw him being a first pick on Battlefield of Eternity, a first ban on Cursed Hollow because of the double bosses, as well as a powerhouse on specific maps that had bosses on them, or maps that just had a really large amount of camps. This is really kind of an issue because it didn't make it very fun. If you were on Battlefield of Eternity and they got Hanzo, you pretty much knew you were going to lose the race. But Hanzo also was a little weak on some of those maps because it was so wide and W build wasn't very good. So they're buffing a lot of the other builds that he has. Buffing his auto attack damage. They're making it to where his W build will lower the cooldown more quickly with auto attacks. However, it's only going to reduce the cooldown on enemy heroes, making it to where you can no longer reduce the cooldown when you're just doing a camp. This has been kind of a powerful talent that's been picked up even if you weren't going W build, as it still sped up the camps that you were going to be doing. I would even pick this up in Q build a lot of times, purely because you could do camps much faster and just kind of blow through in damage. They are nerfing it in the PvE, but buffing it in the PvP. I like this change because the people who liked the W build for that burst, or the people who like the W build for that poke, can be almost more powerful with the W build by auto-attacking the tank to lower their cooldown and really blowing people up. but it nerfs all of his camp clear, which is what needed to be nerfed. It was really brutal. They had to kind of keep nerfing all of them just to make his camp clear, because the camp clear kept keeping his win rate up. Now that they've nerfed that, I think he's in a pretty good spot. They're buffing his Q talent that was up here, as well as his Giant Slayer talent that he had. Both were kind of outmatched by his Pierce talents, which were primarily used in his W builds. So I think generally these are some really good changes. Kerrigan, I'm not going to talk too much about hers. It's the same thing that they're doing with a lot of other heroes. They're buffing the builds that are not necessarily the most popular, as well as they're nerfing some of her base talents to compensate for the new buffs. So instead of them nerfing, I really like these changes. Instead of them nerfing the best build that a hero has, they nerf the hero slightly and then they buff all of their other builds. That way, the best build goes to kind of a balanced state and all the other talents kind of go up to a balanced state. So, they're nerfing some of her base stuff, but then they're buffing her Assimilation Mastery, which is when you have Shield, your health and mana regen is increased by, well, now 150%. Her Sharpened Blades, which means that when you kill a minion with Q, this is one of her quests that she has, it increases your damage and of your Q, and the maximum damage bonus has been increased from 50 to 100, sorry, from 50 to 75, and it's doubled the rate that you increase this. This talent was pretty rough just because it took so long to actually ramp up that it wasn't really that great. Now it's going to be a lot faster to ramp up, so I'm pretty excited about it. It was a talent that was pretty good if you ever have to like double soak with her. And they're also buffing some of her other Q talents later on. They're buffing the Chrysalis, lowering the cooldown of it, which is pretty nice, and buffing Omega Storm. Pretty much just gives the bonus duration an increase, so you can keep that going on further. On a Nova, they're just changing something around, moving her mana cost reduction that was on 13 down to 7, and her bonus stacks up to 13. And the goal from this, and I don't play a lot of Nova, that's why I'm not going to talk about this that much, but here's what their goal was essentially to make snipe build friendlier to players in the early game, most notably to the players who were skilled enough to land multiple snipes in a team fight. So you land a couple snipes in an early team fight, you were out of mana, now you can keep those going for a long time. This might make her better in early team fights. And I don't know, I don't play a lot of Nova, but for those who do play Nova, throw it in the comments. Do you think this is going to help her out, or do you think this is kind of one of those negligible changes? Orphea, one of the heroes that was pretty contested in terms of, I guess it had a very polarizing effect. A lot of people said Orphea was overpowered. A lot of people said Orphea was underpowered. Her win rate kind of said that she was underpowered. One of the things that I thought was kind of broken about Orphea was how much burst damage she was capable of in her burst build was higher than just about everyone else in that same amount of time. For example, if someone was to get taunted by a variant, or taunted by a Garrosh, or just a major CC that gives you about a second to react, she could send out an E, which was her slow and her explosion, and she could send out an E, which then slows them. She could use her Q, which would get you close to them. The E would explode, making sure that you have that slow that would give you that 25% extra damage from your level 1 talent. Then you would chomp once with your W and chomp twice with the E talent at level 16. And this would do well over 100% of an assassin's health. And usually a taunt would be followed up by a little bit of damage from your team. Or you could throw in your ult to finish off the average healer, or do about 70% of your average tank. This is kind of way too much damage for a hero that had that much mobility, and for a hero that is that had that much sustained damage. So Ishbu kind of brought up the fact that he liked the playstyle of Orphea, that she was a very mobile hero with very sustained damage, a decent amount of sustained healing to keep her up from a little bit of poke because she's kind of close in there. And he liked the fact that she had a bursty talent at a risky thing. Like, you had to move in to do that risk. He didn't like the fact that she was not only a sustained damage healer that had enough damage to one-shot combo people, but it was kind of nice to be able to have a big amount of burst damage on a sustained damage dealer. So, the changes that they did was effectively increased her sustained damage, by increasing the damage of her Q, the bonus damage of her Q, and her auto attack damage, which remember can be increased. So not only does this change scale, but also it is multiplied by her trait. So this is actually a pretty good change. Don't forget that this also increases her healing. But then they nerfed the, or they made it to where the cooldown of her Crushing Jaws is longer. I called this like weeks ago. But also they made it to where her level 16 talent shares the cooldown with Chomp. So you can no longer double Chomp people, which is really, really good. And a level 16 talent makes it to where you can still chomp at a range if you're going a chomp build. So you can do a chomp from a safer area. For example, say you're going against a Garrosh. You probably would still want to take this in a W build because you don't want to get close enough to where you get flipped and then killed just to chomp someone. So in general, I think these were really, really good changes. Buff all of her sustain damage, but leave a decent amount of her burst, but not enough burst to blow people up by herself. It just wasn't fun to play against. It was way too much damage, and it was just really, really scary. So let's kind of shoot through this. Let's get into Abathur. Abathur has the Regeneration Master nerfed a little bit. This should nerf a little bit of his healing build. Not too much. It'll still be viable. Just might not be as overpowered as it was before. I mean, it wasn't really overpowered, but it was pretty overtuned. Asmodan seeing a little bit of nerfs. He was pretty strong in the low ranks, and so I think they're nerfing some of the things that made him strong in the low ranks. Games that made it to level 20, as a lot of times in high ranks, games wouldn't make it to level 20. So they're nerfing those a little bit. Supports, we're seeing a slight nerf to Ana. After they made the change to where her Q pierces full health targets, they are lowering her healing a little bit to compensate. Deckard's always been an issue, so they're making it to where your healing potions, instead of you just constantly throwing them out, you have to be a little bit more calculated at where you're going to throw them, because the mana cost is being increased, the cooldown is being increased, and the healing is being increased. So you heal a little bit more, but here's the thing. The cooldown is being increased by 33%. Which means, is your healing actually being increased by 33%? No, it would have increased by 60 healing, and it only increased by about 21 healing. So this is still effectively a nerf, even though it is a change. It's effectively a nerf. So it's interesting, but they're just trying to get him out of that area. Stukov, he's getting a buff to the range of his lurking arm. They pretty much said that after they made the changes to him a few months ago, they wanted to create new build paths. The problem was that they nerfed him so bad that all of his build paths had a low win rate, except for the one that I've been running, and this will buff the one that I've been running while also buffing some of the other ones. So I am a little cautious about that, purely because it's going to end up probably nerfing the build that I was using. Which is fine. I would rather more build variety than I would having one dominant build that's fun. Tyrande. I like these changes. They're nerfing her Q a little bit just to kind of ease on her win rate a little bit, and they're switching the levels of her level 1 talents. I actually recommended this change, but I recommended it as a different talent tier. I said they should make it to where her level 1 talents go to level 13. And the reason why is because her level 13 talents, I mean, level 7 works too. I mentioned there's a few things that are all possible with doing this. You could change it to where her level 4 talents are level 1. The challenge is that she has a really powerful cleanse that she gets very, very early on. So they're moving her cleanse back to level 7, which is the level that everyone that gets cleanse gets their cleanse at. So... with the exception of like Kerrigan and a couple others. But generally, this is an interesting change. I'm excited to see it. It's not a hard nerf to Tyrande, but it's something that might lower her win rate a little bit and make her a little bit less dominant in the early game. Whitemane lowering the cooldown of her Desperate Plea. This just kind of, it's a slight nerf to every build. Whenever someone would just get caught and take a little bit too much damage too fast, you would be able to throw all your Qs onto someone and kind of keep them up at the cost of all of your mana. It was a risky play. Now they're just making that risky play a little bit more punishing, I guess. Less likely that you can actually do it. On to Blaze, he's seeing some really good changes. A slight nerf to Bunker, making it to where you have a channel time to get in. The Feeding the Flames, kind of a buff to his Q talent. His W talent no longer gets the increased slow amount, which is, in my opinion, this was the biggest problem. This made Blaze overpowered when they did do this. Now that they're removing this, I think that this is a generally good talent, but not the must pick at level 4 anymore. Still a really good talent. And then they're making Meltdown get buffed. Meltdown was always my pick if the enemies had a lot of frontliners. Now it's just generally better. It stacks faster and it stacks stronger. Mal'Ganis, the major nerf that's really important here is the Fell Claws cooldown increase and the maximum health reduction on the level 7 talent. And Yrel is seeing a nerf that's going to make her harder for players that that weren't that good on her, and it's going to make her the same for players that were really good on her. It essentially makes it to where you only get your buff from Maraud's Insight if you deal damage to an enemy with an ability, a basic ability. Pretty much means that if you want to try to heal, you have to be jumping on an enemy hero. A lot of the players that I saw in lower ranks that were playing Yrel would pretty much, if they needed healing, they would just kind of press their Q in the back line. They would auto-attack a minion, press their E in the back line, auto-attack a minion now. But the higher ranked players that were playing Yrel were always trading with the enemy hero, and they were dominating because of this. So it makes it to where the more aggressive playstyles of Yrel won't be changed at all, but the more defensive playstyles of Yrel will see a pretty large nerf on this talent, and it might also just be better to go with a different talent if you're going to be playing more safe with this. They're changing they're fixing some bugs, tooltips which needed to be fixed, and the Safeguard was granting an incorrect amount of armor. Remember, it said it was supposed to grant 30. It was granting 25. Indirect nerf. I mean, it was an indirect nerf. Now it's just back to normal. And some user interface stuff. This video ended up a little bit longer than I wanted to, but they were doing a lot of balance changes and on a wide variety of the heroes in different roles, and generally I like a lot of these. There were a couple of them that I'm a little concerned about, but I like the majority of these changes, and sad day for Chen, who shows up on the picture. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think that these changes are going to be healthy for the game? Do you like the quick match changes? What about those Nova mains out there? Since I don't play a lot of Nova, what do you think about those little changes that were made to Nova? Are they going to help? Are they going to hurt? As always, the patch notes are going to be in the description below. And thank you all for watching.